Hey everyone! Tonight we're diving into a fascinating, slightly unsettling corner of history, one that might just make you rethink what you thought you knew about domestic bliss. Why did women hide daggers beneath their aprons, even while cooking? Imagine, for a moment, the warm glow of a medieval hearth. You're standing in a simple, bustling kitchen, the scent of baking bread mingling with the earthy aroma of root vegetables simmering over the fire. Your hands are busy, kneading dough or stirring a stew, the rough linen of your apron protecting your gown. But beneath that seemingly innocuous apron, tucked into a hidden pocket or even directly into your bodice, rests a small, sharp blade, a dagger. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from tonight and what time it is for you right now. And hey, if you're enjoying the historical vibes, like and follow the channel to keep waiting for the next exciting parts. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You might be picturing a serene domestic scene, perhaps from a storybook. A woman, the quintessential homemaker, overseeing her domain. But the reality for many women across various historical periods, from the medieval era through the early modern period, was far less idyllic than popular imagination often paints it. Life was, to put it mildly, precarious. Safety wasn't a guarantee provided by a robust police force or a quick phone call for help. It was a personal responsibility, and often it meant being prepared to defend yourself, even in places you'd consider safe. The very idea of a woman, especially one engaged in such a peaceful act as cooking, carrying a concealed weapon can feel jarring to our modern sensibilities. We associate daggers with knights, soldiers, and highwaymen, not with housewives. Yet, the historical record, from archaeological finds to legal documents and personal accounts, offers tantalizing glimpses of this surprising practice. You see illustrations, sometimes in the margins of illuminated manuscripts, of women with what appear to be knives tucked into their belts or garments. You read court records detailing instances of women using such blades in self-defense, or, occasionally, for less savory purposes. It's a quiet historical anomaly that speaks volumes about the challenges and dangers of daily life. Consider the mainstream historical fact that personal sidearms, including daggers and knives, were far more common everyday accessories for people of all social strata, not just soldiers, than we typically imagine today. You'd see men with daggers openly on their belts, but for women, concealment often became a necessity, driven by different social expectations and vulnerabilities. This wasn't about fashion, at least not primarily. It was about pragmatism, about survival. A quirky tidbit that often surprises people is that some of these concealed knives were known by names that hinted at their secret nature, like misericord or dagger of mercy, often used to deliver a final blow to a mortally wounded foe, but also a compact, personal weapon. For women, a small knife might simply be referred to as a girdle knife, openly worn but still discreet, or as an apron knife, suggesting its common hiding place. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of women carrying such weapons implies a greater level of female agency and independence than traditionally acknowledged, or if it merely underscores the extreme levels of danger and violence women faced, even at home. Whatever the interpretation, your image of the peaceful domestic scene now has a sharp, metallic edge to it, doesn't it? That subtle metallic edge to your image of domesticity now sharpens further as we delve into the core reason for that hidden blade, the unexpected and often terrifying need for domesticity's dangerous edge. Oh, you might assume that once you stepped inside your home, particularly in a rural or seemingly peaceful setting, you were safe. But historical reality paints a far more grim picture. The home, for many women, was not always a sanctuary. It could be a place where threats materialized from within or without, demanding immediate personal defense. Consider the isolation. For a woman living in a medieval or early modern farmhouse, perhaps miles from the nearest village, she was often alone for long stretches of the day. Her husband might be in the fields, or away trading, leaving her in charge of the homestead, the children, and any valuable possessions. There was no alarm system, no immediate neighbor to call upon, certainly no modern communication device. The quiet creak of a floorboard, the rustle in the bushes outside, could signify anything from a stray animal to a dangerous intruder. And in an era where property disputes could escalate quickly and desperate individuals roamed the land, those threats were very real. You'd probably lock the door if you had one. But what then? Beyond external threats, the internal dynamics of the home could also be perilous. We tend to romanticize historical families, but the reality of domestic violence was tragically a pervasive issue. A husband, fueled by drink, anger, or economic hardship, could become a significant threat. With limited legal recourse for women and societal norms that often downplayed or even excused marital abuse, a woman's physical safety could be in constant jeopardy, even from her supposed protector. A hidden dagger in such circumstances was not a weapon of aggression, but often a last, desperate resort for self-preservation. It was a silent guardian, a boundary marker against overwhelming physical force. Mainstream historical fact confirms that documented cases of domestic violence were tragically common in historical periods, often going unpunished or lightly punished. Court records, where they survive, frequently mention physical altercations within the home, sometimes involving serious injury. For a woman, a weapon like a dagger could be the only immediate deterrent against a larger, stronger assailant, whether an abusive partner or a desperate stranger. Then there's the defense of property. Your home wasn't just your living space. It was often where your wealth was concentrated. Food stores, livestock, meager savings all were vulnerable to theft. A woman managing the household might find herself the sole defender against a robber or a raiding party. A kitchen full of sharp implements might offer some defense, but a purpose-built, readily accessible dagger provided a more immediate and effective option. One must protect one's lard, dear. It's worth more than silver these days, you might wryly note to yourself. A quirky tidbit is that some historical legal codes, particularly in Germanic traditions, recognized a woman's right to defend her home and family, even with deadly force, when faced with an intruder. This legal recognition, though often inconsistently applied, suggests that the need for women to be armed, at least defensively, was understood within the societal framework. Historians still argue whether the presence of concealed daggers was a testament to women's active participation in their own defense, or if it highlights the broader societal failures to provide adequate protection for vulnerable individuals in an unpredictable world. Either way, that small blade beneath your apron represented a stark reality. You were your own first line of defense, with the ever-present understanding that your home, despite its walls and hearth, held its own perils. Let's widen our gaze to grasp the woman's realm. You see, societal expectations in historical periods, particularly the medieval and early modern eras, often confine women primarily to the domestic sphere. This wasn't just a suggestion, it was a deeply ingrained cultural norm, reinforced by law, custom, and religious teachings. And this confinement, ironically, shaped both their vulnerability and their methods of defense. You were, in many ways, the mistress of your household. Your primary duties revolved around managing the home, raising children, overseeing servants if you had them, preparing food, and often engaging in various domestic crafts like spinning, weaving, or brewing. Your world was centered on the hearth, the garden, and perhaps the local market. This isn't to say women never left the home, far from it, but their excursions were often for specific purposes directly related to their domestic role, and they were expected to return to the proper place. This concept of the woman as keeper of the home had profound implications for personal safety. Because your movements were largely restricted to defined, often isolated areas, The threats you encountered were different from those faced by men, who more frequently ventured into public, often dangerous, spaces like battlefields, trade routes, or distant courts. For you, the most immediate dangers were often those that could invade your domestic sanctity: intruders, bandits targeting your home, or, as we've discussed, internal threats like an abusive family member. A woman's place is in the home. You see, where she can best be protected and protect herself. A well-meaning but ultimately misguided uncle might lecture. Mainstream historical fact confirms that legal systems often classified women, particularly married women, under the legal concept of femme covert, meaning their legal identity was largely subsumed by that of their husband. This often limited their ability to own property independently, sign contracts, or pursue legal action without male representation. This legal vulnerability further underscores why self-defense might have fallen more directly to the woman herself in immediate, physical terms. Consider the prevailing cultural narratives. Ballads and folktales often depicted women as damsels in distress, needing rescue, rather than active participants in their own defense. Yet, the reality was often quite different. Faced with real danger, a woman couldn't simply wait for a knight in shining armor. She had to be resourceful, pragmatic, and sometimes lethal. A hidden dagger provided that critical, immediate capability. A quirky tidbit is that some domestic manuals from the period, while primarily focused on household management, would occasionally offer advice on how to handle unwanted visitors, or even how to prepare for possible brigandage, implicitly acknowledging the very real dangers that could intrude upon the home. These weren't explicit self-defense guides for women, but their mere inclusion suggests an understanding that the female head of the household might be the first and only responder. Historians still argue whether the societal emphasis on female domesticity genuinely provided a protective bubble, or if it inadvertently made women more vulnerable by isolating them from external support systems and legal protections. Regardless, that concealed blade was a quiet contradiction to the public image of a delicate, defenseless woman, a testament to your quiet strength in a world full of unseen dangers. While the domestic sphere was your primary realm, and indeed a place where a hidden dagger could be cruelly necessary, you weren't entirely confined to the four walls of your home. You often found yourself venturing out, navigating the world, beyond the kitchen hearth. And these journeys, however brief or routine, came with their own distinct set of perils, making that concealed blade even more crucial. Imagine a trip to the local market, the bustling marketplace, while a vibrant hub of community life, was also a chaotic melting pot. Pickpockets abounded, their nimble fingers quick to relieve you of your coin purse. Disgruntled merchants could turn violent in disputes, and the sheer crush of bodies, the anonymity of the crowd, could create opportunities for more sinister acts. You might instinctively place a hand over the subtle bulge beneath your apron, a small, reassuring gesture that your protection was close at hand. One simply can't trust everyone with their wares, or their dignity, in this unruly marketplace. You might mutter to yourself, keeping a wary eye. Beyond the daily market, you might have to travel further afield, perhaps to visit a sick relative in a neighboring village, or to deliver goods to a client if you were involved in trade, which many women were. These journeys, even short ones, were often undertaken on foot or by slow, unreliable horse-drawn cart. Roads were poorly maintained, often no more than muddy tracks, and they were prime hunting grounds for highwaymen and bandits. These weren't just romantic figures from ballads. They were dangerous criminals who would not hesitate to use violence to get what they wanted. A woman traveling alone, or even with a child, was seen as a particularly vulnerable target. A flash of a hidden blade, even if only a deterrent, could mean the difference between robbery and something far, far worse. Mainstream historical fact confirms that travel, even local travel, was significantly more dangerous in historical periods due to poor infrastructure, lack of widespread law enforcement, and the prevalence of banditry. The concept of safe passage as we understand it simply didn't exist. You relied on your wits, your companions, and often your own means of defense. Consider pilgrimages, a common undertaking for women of all social classes. These long journeys, often on foot, took you far from the safety of familiar territory. You'd pass through remote forests, over desolate moors, and stay in inns whose safety could never be fully guaranteed. The dangers of the road robbery, assault, or even opportunistic abduction were ever present. A small, concealed dagger was not a weapon for engaging in a prolonged fight, but rather a tool for desperate defense, to gain a moment's advantage, to create an opportunity to escape, or to inflict just enough harm to deter an attacker. A quirky tidbit is that some travel guides from the early modern period, while mostly focused on routes and lodging, would occasionally offer veiled advice about carrying discreet means of protection, hinting at the understood necessity for personal security. Historians still argue whether the perceived danger of travel for women was exaggerated in historical accounts to justify male protection, or if it accurately reflected a grim reality that necessitated self-armament. Whatever the exact balance, you understood that stepping beyond your threshold meant entering a world where your hidden blade might be the only thing standing between you and harm. Given the very real dangers you faced, both within and beyond the home, the question then becomes, how exactly did you hide that dagger? This brings us to a fascinating aspect of historical practicality, how fashioning concealment, part one's fun, was intricately woven into the very fabric of medieval and early modern clothing, making discreet weapon carrying a surprisingly natural extension of your daily attire. Forget bulky sheaths strapped to your thigh like a bandit in a penny. Dreadful for you, the solution was far more elegant, more integrated. Your clothes weren't just about style or warmth. They were designed with practicality in mind, and sometimes with a subtle nod to personal security. The layers, the draping, the very construction of medieval gowns and aprons offered ample opportunities for concealment without drawing undue attention. Consider the girdle belt born, a ubiquitous accessory for women across social classes. This wasn't merely decorative, often made of leather, cloth, or even metal links. It cinched your gown at the waist, providing a convenient anchor for various utilitarian items. While a man might openly hang a purse or a larger dagger from his belt, yours could be designed differently. A small knife or bodkin, a sharp, pointed tool used for piercing fabric or hair, might be tucked into the belt itself, or into a small, specially sewn pouch attached to the inside of the girdle, keeping it close to your body and out of sight. The loose folds of your gown, or the apron worn over it, would then provide the perfect camouflage. "Oh, this old thing, just a little something for my needlework," you might casually remark, as you discreetly adjust your belt. Mainstream historical fact confirms that women's clothing in the medieval period was often layered, with an undertunic, a gown, and various outer garments. These layers naturally created pockets of space and allowed for items to be tucked in without creating obvious bulges. It was a functional elegance, where practicality often trumped restrictive fashion. Then there was the apron itself. Far from being merely a protective garment for cooking, the apron was a fundamental part of a woman's daily wear, providing an additional layer of fabric that extended from waist to hem. Its very purpose was to cover and protect, making it the ideal spot to hide something you wish to keep out of sight. A small dagger could be slipped into a reinforced seam or into a clever internal pocket sewn into the apron's lining. The soft fabric would cushion the blade, and its constant movement as you went about your chores would make any subtle outline virtually undetectable. A true Trojan horse of personal defense. A quirky tidbit that illustrates this ingenuity: some medieval aprons, particularly those designed for wealthier women, were sometimes described as having secret pouches or hidden slits for carrying small items of value. While these weren't always explicitly for weapons, the design principle was the same, creating discreet storage within the garment. Historians still argue whether the functional design of medieval clothing inadvertently fostered self-defense, or if women intentionally adapted existing garment styles to accommodate concealed weapons out of necessity. Whatever the intent, the result was clear: your everyday attire became your silent accomplice in preparedness. Beyond the general adaptability of medieval attire, let's explore fashioning concealment, Part 2, and delve into the more specific garment adaptations that allowed you to carry a hidden blade with remarkable discretion. This wasn't just about tucking a knife into an existing fold. It involved clever design choices, sometimes subtle, sometimes ingenious, that made the weapon an almost invisible extension of your person. Consider the bodice or corset that many women wore, even if it wasn't the rigid, restrictive garment we often picture from later centuries. Early forms were often more like stiffened undergarments, providing support and shaping. These could be ideal places for concealment: a small, slender dagger, sometimes no longer than your hand, could be slipped down the front of the bodice, resting against your chest, its hilt perhaps just peeking above the neckline, easily covered by a necklace or a scarf. The warmth of your body would ensure it stayed firmly in place, and the layers of fabric would mute any telltale outline. Oh, this little jewel. Just a pin, dear, nothing more. You might demur, your hand unconsciously brushing the spot. Another ingenious method involved the voluminous sleeves common in many medieval and early modern gowns. Sleeves could be wide, flowing, or gathered at the wrist, creating natural pockets of fabric. A specially designed thin sheath could be sewn into the lining of a sleeve, allowing a small dagger to be slid in and out with relative ease. This offered quick access, particularly useful if you needed to draw the blade in a hurry without fumbling under layers of fabric. The movement of your arm would further disguise its presence, making it seem like part of the natural drape of the garment. Mainstream historical fact indicates that clothing styles across various periods often served multiple purposes beyond mere fashion, including carrying small personal items or, indeed, concealed weapons. The practicality of medieval dress, for instance, often superseded purely aesthetic concerns. Then there's the skirt itself, Unterarm, particularly if it was full and layered. A narrow, reinforced pocket could be sewn into an inner seam of your underskirt or gown. While not offering immediate access, it would provide a secure, completely hidden location for a slightly larger knife if absolute stealth was paramount. Retrieving it might require a brief moment of privacy, perhaps under the cover of darkness or a distraction, but it guaranteed the weapon's complete invisibility to others. It was the ultimate out of sight, out of mind approach. A quirky tidbit is the historical existence of ring daggers, tiny, almost ornamental blades integrated into finger rings. Though these were more novelty or symbolic than practical self-defense, for serious concealment, the structural elements of everyday clothing were far more effective. Historians still argue whether the widespread adoption of these clothing adaptations for concealed weapons points to a society where women were actively encouraged to defend themselves, or if it merely highlights the desperate measures women had to resort to in the absence of adequate legal and societal protection. Regardless, you, the historical woman, understood that your attire was not just a shield against the elements or a display of status. It was, quite literally, a potential sheath for your survival. While dedicated daggers were certainly carried, let's not overlook the ingeniously pragmatic way women often armed themselves by simply recognizing the humble kitchen knife could easily double as a self-defense weapon. You see, in a world where specialized tools were less common and resourcefulness was paramount, the lines between domestic implement and defensive arm often blurred. Imagine you're in your kitchen, chopping vegetables for a hearty stew. The knife in your hand is well used, its blade sharpened from countless tasks. It's a tool, an extension of your culinary skill. But in an instant, should danger appear an unexpected intruder, a sudden threat, that same knife transforms. Its sharp edge, its pointed tip, its comfortable grip, all suddenly become vital assets for self-preservation. It's a subtle shift in perception, but a powerful one. A good woman always keeps a sharp knife. Your mother might have told you, perhaps with a knowing glance that went beyond culinary advice. Mainstream historical fact confirms that in homes across social strata, kitchen knives were among the most common and accessible sharp implements. Unlike specialized daggers, which might be a luxury for some, a reliable kitchen knife was a necessity for every household. This ubiquity meant that even if a woman couldn't afford a dedicated personal weapon, she almost certainly had a potential one at hand. Consider the various forms these kitchen daggers might take. There were large, robust carving knives used for preparing meat, which could deliver a powerful blow. Smaller, pointed paring knives, while less intimidating, were agile and could be used for precise, defensive jabs. Even the seemingly innocuous bodkin, a thick, pointed needle used for piercing fabric or threading laces, could, in a desperate moment, serve as a surprisingly effective puncturing tool if aimed at a vulnerable spot. It's a testament to human ingenuity in the face of peril using what you have, making do with your immediate resources. A quirky tidbit that highlights this dual purpose in some archaeological digs of medieval homes: it's often difficult to definitively categorize smaller, utilitarian knives found in domestic contexts as purely kitchen knives or personal daggers because their design often overlapped. This ambiguity underscores their inherent versatility. Historians still argue whether the commonality of sharp kitchen implements meant women were inherently better prepared for self-defense than historical records explicitly state, or if the lack of dedicated training meant these kitchen daggers were primarily weapons of last resort, used out of desperation rather than skill. Regardless, as you wield your humble kitchen knife, you understand its quiet power, a tool for creation. Yes, but also, if need be, a tool for survival. Beyond the humble kitchen knife, your reliance on self-defense stemmed from a stark reality: the profound limitations of law, order, and anarchy in historical periods. Forget your modern police force, rapid emergency services, or a clear chain of command. In the medieval and early modern eras, the concept of widespread, consistent law enforcement was, at best, rudimentary, and at worst, practically non-existent. This void often left individuals, especially women, to fend for themselves. Imagine a world where your local constable might be an aging villager with a rusty halberd, whose primary duties involve collecting taxes or keeping an eye on petty disputes, not patrolling for violent crime. If a crime occurred, especially in a remote area, help was hours, if not days, away. There was no 911, no quick response team. Justice, when it came, was often slow, cumbersome, and notoriously inconsistent, favoring those with power and influence. You were largely on your own when faced with immediate danger. Waiting for the sheriff to arrive, you'd be dust by then. Dear, a hardened farmer's wife might scoff. Mainstream historical fact confirms that centralized professional police forces only began to emerge in Western Europe during the 18th and 19th centuries. Before that, law enforcement was largely localized, reactive, and often ineffective outside major urban centers. This widespread lack of official protection created an environment where self-reliance was not just a virtue, but a necessity for survival. This extended to the legal system itself. While laws against assault and robbery existed, their enforcement was patchy. If you were a woman, particularly one with limited social standing or resources, securing justice against an assailant could be an uphill battle. Your testimony might be doubted, your reputation questioned, and the sheer cost of legal proceedings prohibitive. This lack of reliable external protection meant that the moment of danger was your moment to act, and a concealed dagger provided that crucial, immediate agency. Consider the general atmosphere of the times: feuds between noble families, roving bands of disbanded soldiers, desperate peasants, and opportunistic criminals were not uncommon. While not daily occurrences for everyone, the threat of such encounters was omnipresent. You lived in a world where the rule of law was often overshadowed by the rule of force, and personal safety was a gamble. A quirky tidbit that illustrates the era's approach to self-defense: many historical legal codes, particularly in Germanic and early English law, recognized a concept similar to castle doctrine, where individuals had a right to defend themselves and their property within their own homes, sometimes with lethal force, without fear of legal reprisal. This implicitly acknowledged the prevalent dangers and the necessity of self-armament. Historians still argue whether the perceived lawlessness of historical periods was a significant deterrent to economic development, or if societies simply adapted to a more decentralized form of justice, with communities often policing themselves through informal means. Whatever the case for you, the constant threat of anarchy lurking just beyond the reach of inadequate law enforcement was a chilling reminder that your hidden blade was not just a convenience, but a vital line of defense in an often unforgiving world. As you step out of the relative, albeit fragile, safety of your home, even for a short distance, a new layer of apprehension settles upon you. We've talked about the limitations of law and order, and this is where it truly hits home: traveling with trepidation. Any journey beyond your immediate village or town, no matter how routine, was an undertaking fraught with peril, making that hidden dagger not just a comfort, but a near necessity. Imagine yourself on a winding, often unpaved road, perhaps bordered by dense forests or open, desolate plains. The air might be crisp, the sun bright, but a chill of unease often accompanies you. There's no roadside assistance, no friendly gas station every few miles. A broken wheel, a lame horse, or simply losing your way could leave you stranded and vulnerable for hours, if not days. And in that vulnerability, danger often lurked. The primary threat you'd fear are highwaymen and bandits. These weren't just characters in romantic tales. They were a very real and persistent menace. They preyed on travelers, knowing that roads were conduits for wealth merchants carrying goods, pilgrims with offerings, or simply individuals carrying their meager savings. A lone woman, or even a small party without male escort, was often seen as an easy target. These brigands were armed, desperate, and often ruthless, caring little for the consequences of their actions in remote areas where justice was slow to arrive. You might grip the hilt of your concealed dagger, a silent prayer on your lips, as you hear the distant thud of hooves or the rustle in the trees. One must always be prepared for unwelcome company on the King's Highway. Dear, your father might have cautioned you. Mainstream historical fact indicates that banditry and highway robbery were significant problems across Europe from the medieval period through the early modern era, severely hindering trade and making personal travel hazardous. Entire regions could be known for their particular gangs of robbers, and travelers often banded together in larger groups for safety, or hired armed escorts if they could afford it. Consider the inns and lodgings along these routes. While some offered genuine respite, others could be dens of thieves, their proprietors perhaps complicit in schemes to rob unsuspecting travelers. You'd never truly know who might be sharing the common room, or what intentions they harbored. A locked door offered little solace if the threat was already inside. Your concealed blade offered a last line of defense, a way to fight for your life or to at least create an opportunity to escape. A quirky tidbit that underscores this fear: travelers would sometimes carry passport daggers or traveler's knives, small, plain blades designed specifically for personal protection on the road, often easily concealed within a cloak or a boot. Historians still argue whether the perceived danger of travel was actively exaggerated by male storytellers and chroniclers to justify the need for male protection, or if it accurately reflected a pervasive and unavoidable threat that necessitated self-armament for women. Whatever the balance, your journey, whether to the next village or across a county, was never just a simple transit. It was a venture into an unpredictable world where preparedness was your best companion. If the open road presented one set of dangers, then the burgeoning urban centers offered another, equally insidious kind. Let's delve into navigating the urban shadows and peril of medieval and early modern cities, where a hidden dagger was less about confronting highwaymen and more about surviving the anonymous, often chaotic, dangers of tightly packed streets. Imagine walking through the narrow, winding lanes of a city like London or Paris in the 15th or 16th century. The air would be thick with the smells of human waste, unwashed bodies, smoke from countless hearths, and the pungent odors of various trades. Houses would lean precariously over the streets, blocking out much of the light, creating perpetual twilight even in the middle of the day. And as evening fell, the darkness would be almost absolute, broken only by the occasional flickering lantern outside a tavern or the dim glow from a window. There were no streetlights as we know them, no ubiquitous civic illumination, lost in the labyrinth of cobbled alleys. Were you? Don't forget your knife, dear, just in case you find unwelcome company, an older, wiser aunt might have advised. Mainstream historical fact confirms that crime rates, particularly petty theft, robbery, and opportunistic violence, were notoriously high in pre-modern cities, exacerbated by poverty, overcrowding, and the sheer anonymity offered by dense populations. The lack of effective police patrols meant that once darkness fell, the streets essentially became a free-for-all for those with ill intent. You'd encounter a bewildering array of characters in these urban spaces: legitimate merchants, bustling apprentices, desperate beggars, boisterous drunkards, and shadowy figures lurking in doorways. The sheer press of bodies made pickpocketing an art form. A sudden shove, a stumble in the gloom, and your purse could be gone before you even realized what happened. But beyond petty theft, there was the constant threat of assault. A woman walking alone, even during the day, could be targeted, her perceived vulnerability a beacon to those who sought to do harm. A quirky tidbit: some historical accounts mention lantern laws in certain cities, requiring citizens to carry a lantern or have one displayed outside their homes after dark. While intended to deter crime, these laws implicitly highlight the profound danger and darkness of urban nights. Historians still argue whether the perceived danger of city life contributed more significantly to the development of early urban policing forces, or if the sheer density of population was the primary driver for such organizational changes. Whatever the catalyst, you understood that your hidden dagger was a silent companion, a subtle defense against the myriad, often unseen, dangers that lurked in the urban shadows. It wasn't about winning a duel. It was about creating a moment of escape, a desperate plea for safety in a world that offered little official protection after dark. While the urban centers presented their own unique perils, the quietude of the countryside brought with it a distinct, often more insidious set of challenges. Let's shift our focus to rural isolation's threats, understanding how the very tranquility of remote settings could amplify danger, making that hidden dagger an essential part of a woman's daily preparedness. Imagine a lone farmhouse nestled amidst rolling hills, or a small cottage at the edge of a vast, ancient forest. The nearest neighbors might be a mile or more away, the closest village an hour's walk. The sounds you hear are the rustling of leaves, the bleating of sheep, the distant caw of a crow, a symphony of nature. Yes, but also a backdrop against which a sudden, unexpected human sound could be terrifyingly jarring. There was no immediate helpline, no quick alarm system beyond your own voice, which might carry only as far as the nearest field. Alone out here, deer better keep something sharp nearby, just in case the wolves aren't the only hungry ones. A seasoned village elder might advise. Mainstream historical fact confirms that rural areas, despite their pastoral image, were often just as, if not more, dangerous than cities due to their isolation and the almost complete absence of effective law enforcement. Criminals, ranging from opportunistic poachers to organized gangs, could operate with relative impunity, knowing that help was far away. The threats were varied. Banditry, as we discussed with travel, wasn't confined to main roads. Isolated homes were prime targets for robbery, as they often held meager but vital resources like food stores, tools, or small caches of coin. A desperate individual, hungry and with nothing to lose, could see a lone woman as an easy mark, the sole obstacle between them and a meal or some valuable possession. You might be working in the garden, your back to the path, when a shadow falls over you, and suddenly, that cooking knife you always kept tucked into your apron becomes your most valuable asset. Beyond outright robbery, there were other, darker threats. The anonymity of the countryside could embolden those with violent intentions, knowing their crimes might go undiscovered for days. Disputes over land, property, or livestock could escalate quickly and turn violent. And for women, the threat of sexual assault was an ever-present, terrifying reality, amplified by the lack of witnesses and the slow pace of justice. A quirky tidbit, some folk remedies and superstitions from rural areas often included charms or rituals to ward off evil spirits or unwanted callers, hinting at the very real anxieties about external threats in isolated settings. Anxieties that a physical weapon could more practically address. Historians still argue whether the romanticized view of rural life in historical narratives accurately depicts its safety, or if it significantly downplays the pervasive threats that necessitated a constant state of vigilance and self-defense for women. Whatever the perception, you knew that in the quiet vastness of the countryside, your hidden blade was not just a tool, it was a silent promise of resistance, a vital companion against the unseen dangers that lurk just beyond the picturesque horizon. You've seen how external threats, from highwaymen to urban thugs and rural brigands, necessitated a hidden blade. But let's turn to a much more insidious and often heartbreaking reality that made that dagger a crucial last resort: the unseen domestic threat. For many women, the greatest danger lay not outside their walls, but within them, often from those who were supposed to be their protectors. Imagine the deeply patriarchal structure of historical societies. A husband was, in legal terms, the master of his household. His authority was vast, often unchecked, and upheld by societal norms and religious doctrine. While many marriages were undoubtedly loving and harmonious, the lack of legal recourse, social support systems, and economic independence for women meant that if a marriage turned sour, if a husband became abusive, a woman could find herself trapped in a terrifyingly vulnerable position. There were no women's shelters, no restraining orders, and often no sympathetic ear from family or community who might dismiss private matters as none of their concern. A husband's discipline is his right, dear. Even if it feels a bit robust, you might hear the words chilling in their casual cruelty. Mainstream historical fact confirms that domestic violence was prevalent across social classes in historical periods, often treated as a private family matter rather than a public crime. Legal systems offered little practical protection for battered wives, and divorce was either impossible, extremely difficult, or financially ruinous for women. This left many women with virtually no escape from an abusive situation. In such an environment, where flight was often not an option, and external help was unavailable or ineffective, a small, concealed dagger became a desperate measure of last resort. It wasn't about winning a fight against a larger, stronger man. It was about deterrence, about creating a momentary window of opportunity to escape, or about inflicting just enough pain to stop an attack. It was a silent act of defiance, a statement that even in total subjugation, a woman retained a sliver of agency over her own body and life. The blade could be used defensively, to ward off a blow, or offensively, in a moment of extreme fear and desperation. A quirky tidbit that reflects this grim reality: some historical medical texts, while not condoning violence, would occasionally describe injuries consistent with domestic abuse, sometimes subtly hinting at the desperation of the victim. These were not openly discussed, but their presence in medical records is a chilling testament to the pervasive nature of the problem. Historians still argue whether the historical acceptance of male authority within the household actively perpetuated domestic violence, or if it merely provided a societal framework within which existing human aggression found an easy outlet. Whatever the underlying causes, you knew that the blade beneath your apron was not just for bandits on the road. It was, horrifyingly, sometimes for the monster within your own home, a grim testament to the fact that even in your own bedchamber, you might need to fight for your very survival. Beyond the personal threat to life and limb, your hidden dagger also served another crucial purpose: protection for property. You see, In a world before banks were widely accessible or secure for common folk, your home wasn't just your dwelling, it was often your strongbox, your pantry, and your storehouse of everything valuable. And a woman, as the mistress of the household, was often the primary, if not sole, guardian of these precious assets. Imagine your small cottage or farmhouse. It contains not only your family's meager savings, perhaps a few silver coins or carefully hidden jewels, but also the very means of your survival: sacks of grain, preserved meats, tools, and perhaps a few valuable livestock like chickens or a goat. These were not just possessions, they were your livelihood, your buffer against starvation or destitution. If they were stolen, your family's very existence could be jeopardized. Keep a close eye on the larder, dear, and an even closer one on any stranger who darkens our door. Your grandmother might have cautioned, her eyes sharp. Mainstream historical fact confirms that theft, particularly of food and livestock, was a pervasive problem in pre-modern agrarian societies, especially during times of famine or economic hardship. Raids by desperate individuals or even organized gangs were a constant threat, and local authorities often lacked the resources or inclination to effectively recover stolen goods or apprehend culprits. When a bandit or a desperate vagrant targeted your home, they weren't just after trinkets, they were after sustenance, the very fabric of your family's well-being. And you, the woman of the house, were often the first and only line of defense. Your husband might be away in the fields, at market, or serving in a lord's retinue, leaving you to face the threat alone. A hidden dagger, therefore, wasn't just about protecting your body, it was about safeguarding your family's future, its sustenance, its very right to exist. The thought of losing everything to a thief was a terrifying prospect, one that justified the readiness of a sharp blade. A quirky tidbit that illustrates this concern: some medieval wills and inventories would meticulously list household goods, underscoring their immense value and the need for their protection. A single cow or a year's worth of grain could be the difference between life and death for a family. Historians still argue whether the historical emphasis on women as guardians of the household economy led to them being disproportionately targeted by thieves, or if it simply made their defensive role more visible in historical accounts. Whatever the case, your small dagger was a silent, steely promise you would not allow your family's hard-won possessions to be taken without a fight. It was a weapon of survival, yes, but also a weapon of economic preservation. You've now seen the stark realities of danger, both personal and economic, that made a hidden dagger a pragmatic necessity. But as a woman in historical society, you also had to contend with the delicate dance between social norms versus necessity. The very act of carrying a weapon, especially one designed for self-defense, could clash with prevailing expectations of female decorum, creating a subtle tension that shaped how and why you armed yourself. Imagine the ideal woman portrayed in medieval ballads or Renaissance paintings: demure, graceful, focused on piety and domestic virtues. She was certainly not depicted as armed, ready for a fight. Overt displays of weaponry were typically associated with men knights, soldiers, or, less favorably, bandits. For a woman to openly carry a dagger, especially a large one, would have been seen as highly unusual, perhaps even unladylike or aggressive, inviting unwanted attention or suspicion. My dear, a lady does not brandish a blade like a common ruffian, your etiquette instructor might have gasped, clutching her pearls. Mainstream historical fact confirms that societal ideals of femininity across many historical periods emphasize qualities like gentleness, modesty, and a non-combative nature for women. These ideals often contrasted sharply with the practical realities of survival in a dangerous world, creating a subtle dissonance for women who needed to protect themselves. This is precisely why concealment was so crucial. It wasn't just about surprise in a confrontation, it was about maintaining appearances. Your dagger wasn't a statement, it was a secret, tucked beneath an apron, hidden within a bodice, or sewn into a skirt lining. It allowed you to adhere to societal expectations of femininity while simultaneously being prepared for dire circumstances. You could appear demure and unthreatening, all while possessing the means to defend your life or your family's assets. It was a silent rebellion, a pragmatic defiance of a double standard. Consider the pragmatic self-preservation at play. While society might frown upon a woman carrying a weapon, it certainly offered little in the way of reliable protection if she were attacked. When faced with the very real threat of assault, robbery, or worse, the abstract concept of ladylike conduct quickly evaporated. The necessity of survival outweighed the niceties of social convention. Your decision to carry a dagger wasn't about projecting an image of strength. It was about ensuring your very existence. A quirky tidbit that highlights this tension in some folk tales or historical anecdotes. A woman using a hidden domestic implement for self-defense like a rolling pin or a hot poker was often celebrated as clever or resourceful, whereas the explicit mention of a concealed knife might be viewed with more ambiguity, perhaps due to its association with male violence. Historians still argue whether the societal pressure for women to appear helpless actually increased their vulnerability by making them less likely to openly carry weapons, or if it simply led to more sophisticated methods of concealed carry. Whatever the precise dynamic, you, the historical woman, navigated this delicate balance, knowing that true safety often lay hidden, far from the judging eyes of society. Building upon the subtle tension between social norms and the grim necessity of self-preservation, let's now examine the very objects that embodied this duality: blades of utility and defense. You see, many of the knives women carried weren't solely for fighting. They were versatile tools, seamlessly blending into daily life until circumstances demanded their transformation into weapons. Imagine the typical girdle knife or eating knife. In a period where personal cutlery wasn't universally provided at every meal, carrying your own knife was common for both men and women. This knife would be used for a myriad of daily tasks: cutting food at the table, perhaps trimming a loose thread from your garment, or opening a package. It was a practical, ever-present accessory, typically with a sharp, pointed blade and a comfortable handle, often carried in a small, simple sheath attached to your belt or girdle. Always bring your own knife, dear. You never know what's on offer. Your hostess might casually advise at a banquet. Mainstream historical fact confirms that personal knives were ubiquitous everyday items throughout the medieval and early modern periods, serving as general-purpose tools for eating, crafting, and various household tasks. Their widespread acceptance meant that a woman carrying a knife would not raise suspicion, but this very utility was its strength as a defensive tool. The knife you used to slice your bread could, in an instant, become your last line of defense. Its sharpness, its familiar weight in your hand, its pointed tip all suddenly became crucial for survival. This dual purpose meant you didn't have to carry a specialized, overtly threatening weapon. You simply carried a tool that, in a pinch, could be used to save your life. It blurred the lines, making preparedness an integrated part of daily existence rather than a separate, confrontational act. Consider the craftswoman. A woman involved in textile production, perhaps weaving or sewing, would routinely use sharp blades for cutting fabric, trimming threads, or shaping materials. These tools, often quite sharp and robust, were extensions of her trade. If her workshop were targeted by a thief, or if she faced a threat while carrying her finished goods to market, her crafting knife could swiftly become her protector. It was a pragmatic approach to personal security, leveraging existing tools for unexpected challenges. A quirky tidbit that demonstrates this utility: some medieval knife designs, often called eating daggers, were specifically designed to be both functional at the dinner table and capable of serving as a defensive weapon. They were robust enough for cutting meat, but shaped like a small dagger, hinting at their dual nature. Historians still argue whether the inherent versatility of these blades led to women being more subtly armed than previously thought, or if the necessity of having a multi-purpose tool simply made them more adaptable in desperate situations. Whatever the primary driver, your knife was more than just a culinary aid. It was a quiet promise of readiness, a blade that understood the difference between dicing vegetables and defending your life. Having explored the versatile nature of everyday knives, let's now consider a specific type of blade that perfectly encapsulated the blend of concealment and effectiveness. The poignard's sharp secret. This wasn't just any dagger. The poignard, or poniard, was a slender, often elegantly designed stabbing weapon that became particularly popular from the late medieval period through the Renaissance. And its very design made it ideal for women seeking discreet self-defense. Imagine a dagger that is typically much narrower and lighter than a knight's combat dagger, often with a sharply pointed blade designed for thrusting rather than slashing. Poignards varied in length, but many were quite compact, ranging from 6 to 12 inches, making them eminently concealable. Their slenderness meant they could be tucked into tight spaces of boot, a voluminous sleeve, or, as our core theme suggests, the folds of an apron or the confines of a bodice. You might even find examples with ornate hilts, beautiful in their craftsmanship, yet designed for deadly purpose. A lady's fan for show, her poignard for necessity. Darling, a worldly wise noblewoman might whisper with a knowing smile. Mainstream historical fact confirms that poignards were highly favored as personal sidearms for both men and women due to their concealability and effectiveness in close quarters. They were often used as a secondary weapon by soldiers, but also as a primary defensive tool for civilians who wanted a discreet means of protection. The beauty of the poignard's design for a woman was its unobtrusiveness. Unlike a broadsword or a hunting knife, a poignard could disappear. Its slim profile meant it created minimal bulge under layers of fabric. It could be drawn quickly in a sudden confrontation, its sharp point designed to find vulnerable spots with precision. This made it a formidable tool for self-defense, allowing a woman to quickly disable an attacker or create an opportunity to escape. Even if she lacked formal combat training, it wasn't about brute force, but about speed and surprise. A quirky tidbit that demonstrates their popularity and varied use. Some historical illustrations depict poignards worn as part of elaborate dress, almost like jewelry, hinting at their aesthetic appeal alongside their deadly function. While men might wear them more openly, women's poignards were almost always discreet. Historians still argue whether the popularity of such slender, specialized blades indicates a growing awareness of close quarters self-defense techniques, or if it primarily reflects a societal preference for elegance, even in weaponry. Whatever the driving force, your poignard was a silent testament to a world where elegance could conceal lethality, and a woman's apparent delicacy could belie a steely resolve to protect herself. With a slender, elegant poignard in mind, let's now consider how a woman, despite societal constraints, might have acquired the minimal but crucial skills to wield such a blade effectively. This brings us to the fascinating, often overlooked, reality of early modern self-defense. Lessons, rudimentary though they may have been, for women, forget elaborate fencing schools. This was about practical, desperate survival. You wouldn't have attended a formal fencing academy. No, such institutions were largely for men, teaching complex swordplay with rapiers and broadswords. But that doesn't mean women were entirely ignorant of how to defend themselves. Much of what you knew would be learned informally, through observation, necessity, and perhaps quiet instruction from a father, brother, or even a trusted servant. My dear, if someone tries to grab you, aim for the soft spots, the eyes, the throat, or the groin, and make it quick. Your father might have whispered during a seemingly innocuous kitchen lesson. Mainstream historical fact indicates that while formal combat training for women was rare, practical knowledge of self-defense, particularly with common household tools or small knives, was often passed down informally, reflecting the dangerous realities of the era. Survival sometimes meant acquiring skills outside the conventional gender roles. Consider the practical application. A hidden dagger wasn't for a duel of honor. It was for a sudden, unexpected assault. The techniques would be simple, direct, and brutal: a quick thrust, a sharp jab, aimed at vulnerable points to incapacitate or deter an attacker long enough to escape. It was about creating distance, causing pain, and seizing an opportunity for flight. You might practice a quick draw in secret, feeling the weight of the hilt in your hand, imagining the swift motion required to bring the blade to bear. The element of surprise, your attacker's underestimation of your capabilities, would be your greatest ally. A quirky tidbit is that some historical martial arts manuals, while overwhelmingly focused on male combat, sometimes included sections or illustrations that subtly hinted at defending against an attack by a ruffian where the defender was seemingly unarmed or using an improvised weapon, perhaps implicitly acknowledging the need for self-defense skills among the general populace, including women. Historians still argue whether the lack of widespread formal self-defense training for women made them more vulnerable to attack, or if their reliance on concealed weapons and surprise tactics was an effective adaptation to their societal constraints. Whatever the true impact, you understood that your early modern self-defense was not about elegance. It was about the raw, visceral instinct for survival, distilled into a few swift, decisive movements with that hidden blade. It was a silent, personal oath you would not go down without a fight. You've considered the practicalities of a woman's self-defense, but let's broaden our view to understand that the need for a hidden blade transcended mere social standing. This was truly a weapon for all classes. A common thread uniting women from the humblest peasant to the loftiest noblewoman in a shared, silent understanding of vulnerability. Imagine her first, the noblewoman. While she might live in a fortified castle or a grand manor house, surrounded by guards and servants, her life was not without its perils. Feuds between powerful families, political intrigues, even abduction for ransom or forced marriage were grim realities. A lady traveling between estates, or one caught in a sudden uprising, would find herself just as exposed to immediate physical danger as anyone else. Her hidden dagger, perhaps a finely crafted, jewel-hilted poignard, might be concealed within the rich folds of her silken gown, a subtle glint of steel beneath the velvet, a desperate resort when her guards were overwhelmed or absent. One cannot always rely on one's retinue. Dear, a lady must be prepared. Her father, a grizzled knight, might have advised. Mainstream historical fact confirms that personal defense weapons were carried by a wide spectrum of society, not just the military elite. The absence of effective, universal state protection meant individuals, regardless of wealth, often took personal security into their own hands. Now, consider the merchant's wife, bustling in her urban home. She might be responsible for handling significant sums of money, overseeing valuable goods, and managing the household. Her home, though perhaps in a crowded city, was still vulnerable to thieves. Her apron, perhaps of finer linen, might conceal a sturdier, more utilitarian knife, ready to protect her family's livelihood. She might not face bandits on the open road, but the cut purse in the market or the desperate intruder in the narrow alley posed an equally grave threat. And then, the peasant woman. Her home was a simple dwelling, perhaps little more than a hut. Her possessions were few, but vital. Her hidden blade might be nothing more than a well-sharpened kitchen knife, tucked into the coarse fabric of her apron or waistband. Her threats were immediate and brutal: a hungry vagrant, a disgruntled neighbor, or even a raiding soldier. For her, the dagger was not a matter of prestige, but of raw survival, a fundamental tool for defending her life and the meager existence of her family. A quirky tidbit that highlights this universality: archaeological digs across different social strata often yield small, personal knives and daggers in contexts associated with both male and female burials, suggesting their widespread ownership and use. Historians still argue whether the type or house of weapon carried by women varied significantly by social class or ge, fine poignards for nobles, utilitarian knives for peasants, or if the core need for discreet self-defense simply manifested in different material forms across society. Regardless of her station, you understood that the hidden blade was a silent equalizer, a testament to the shared vulnerability of women in a world where personal safety was always, ultimately, your own responsibility. With the understanding that a hidden blade was a common companion across all social strata, let's now bring these abstract notions to life with actual instances, stories of heroic defense. You see, while documentation might be scarce, historical records, legal proceedings, and even folk tales occasionally offer tantalizing glimpses of women actually using their hidden daggers, often in moments of extraordinary courage and desperation. These aren't just hypotheticals. They're echoes of real acts of defiance. Imagine a woman, perhaps a merchant's wife, alone in her shop while her husband is away at market. A rough-looking stranger enters, demanding money, his intentions clearly violent. As he lunges, her hand, almost instinctively, flashes beneath her apron. The small knife, perhaps one she uses daily to cut twine or open sacks, emerges. A quick, defensive thrust, not necessarily to kill, but to injure, to deter, to create that vital moment of surprise and escape. The attacker recoils, perhaps clutching a wounded arm, and she seizes the opportunity to flee or call for help. You thought me a helpless dove, did you? Rogue think. Again she might have spat, her heart pounding. Mainstream historical fact includes numerous documented cases in court records across Europe where women were charged with assault or even murder, but successfully argued self-defense when faced with rape, robbery, or spousal abuse. While these cases often face societal biases, their very existence confirms that women did indeed resort to physical defense. Consider the tales, passed down through generations, of rural women defending their homesteads. A band of hungry vagrants approaches a lone farmhouse, eyeing the livestock. The farmer's wife, alone with her children, has no other recourse. She might grab a large kitchen knife, perhaps one still stained from preparing supper, and stand her ground at the doorway, a formidable figure against the fading light. Her fierce determination, backed by the glint of steel, might be enough to send the intruders scattering. Realizing the risk isn't worth the meager reward, it's a testament to the primal instinct to protect one's own. A quirky tidbit that illuminates these narratives in some medieval sagas or early modern broadsides. There are often accounts of brave women who, when faced with attack, either tricked their assailants or used some hidden implement to escape. While dramatized, these stories often carried a kernel of truth about the desperate measures women employed. Historians still argue whether the limited documentation of these heroic defenses means they were rare, or if such instances were simply underreported due to societal norms that preferred to see women as passive victims rather than active combatants. Whatever the frequency, these stories, however faint, serve as powerful reminders that the hidden dagger was not merely a theoretical protection. It was a tool that, in the right or wrong moment, could be drawn and used with deadly, life-saving intent. Beyond the immediate need for defense, the choice of a hidden blade could also be subtly influenced by aesthetics and the prevailing trends of the time. This brings us to how, from fashion to function, the style of a woman's weapon could sometimes be as important as its practical use, reflecting a surprising blend of utility and personal expression. Imagine a noblewoman, perhaps attending a courtly gathering or a grand feast. Her gown is exquisite, adorned with embroidery and jewels. Overtly displaying a bulky utilitarian knife would be uncouth, ruining the elegant line of her attire. But a slender, poignardinous, with a hilt crafted from polished bone or perhaps inlaid with silver, could be slipped discreetly into a hidden pocket of her velvet overskirt or a specially designed slot in her bodice. It was a weapon, yes, but one that complemented her ensemble, a secret ornament of protection. My dear, one simply must coordinate one's accessories, even the unseen ones. She might quip to a confidant with a knowing wink. Mainstream historical fact indicates that personal sidearms, especially daggers and knives, often became items of personal adornment with elaborate craftsmanship, precious materials, and intricate designs reflecting the owner's wealth and status. This wasn't exclusive to men. Women's concealed blades could also be beautifully made. Consider the various ways fashion trends could inadvertently influence weapon choice. As sleeves became wider or more voluminous in certain periods, they offered more ample space for concealing longer, narrower blades. When corsets or stiffened bodices were in vogue, they provided a firm anchor for small, flat daggers tucked against the body. The very structure of clothing could dictate the optimal shape and size of the hidden weapon, demonstrating a curious interplay between sartorial style and defensive practicality. A quirky tidbit is the concept of toilet daggers, small, ornate knives often found on dressing tables, ostensibly for opening letters or trimming quill pens, but designed to be sharp enough for defense if needed. While primarily functional objects within a specific context, their presence in a woman's personal space subtly reinforced the idea of discreet readiness. Historians still argue whether the aesthetic appeal of certain dagger types, like the elegant poignard, made women more inclined to carry them, thereby increasing their self-defense capabilities, or if function always dictated form, with aesthetics being a secondary consideration. Whatever the balance, your choice of a hidden blade was often a testament to a world where even practical necessity could find expression in a touch of personal flair. It was a secret statement, a blend of dangerous practicality and understated elegance, hidden beneath the carefully chosen layers of your attire. As centuries passed and society slowly evolved, the landscape of personal safety began to shift, leading to BWA, the rise of personal security, that gradually, almost imperceptibly, lessened the absolute reliance on a woman's hidden blade. This wasn't an overnight revolution, but a slow, often uneven, development of institutions and infrastructure that offered alternative forms of protection. Imagine a city in the late 17th or 18th century. While still dangerous by modern standards, you might begin to see the earliest precursors of organized law enforcement. Night watches, composed of local citizens or paid guards, patrolled the streets, offering a slightly more visible deterrent against crime after dark. These weren't professional police forces, but they represented a nascent attempt at civic order. You might feel a tiny bit safer knowing that there was some presence beyond yourself. The watchman passed by thrice tonight. Dear, perhaps we shall all sleep a little sounder, a weary homeowner might remark. Mainstream historical fact confirms that the establishment of regular, paid night watches and, later, rudimentary police forces in major European cities like London's Bow Street Runners in the mid-18th century marked a significant, albeit gradual, step towards more organized public safety, slowly reducing the need for universal individual armament. Beyond nascent law enforcement, improvements in infrastructure also played a role. As roads became slightly better maintained and travel became marginally less hazardous due to increased traffic and, eventually, faster modes of transport like stagecoaches, the threat of highwaymen, while still present, was perhaps less omnipresent for casual journeys. The growth of more stable national governments also meant a decrease in widespread banditry caused by disbanded armies or prolonged civil unrest. Though local criminality persisted, the proliferation of more secure domestic architecture also contributed. As homes moved away from simple, easily breached structures, and as locks became more sophisticated, the external threat to the household, while never entirely eliminated, became somewhat harder to execute. You might invest in a sturdier door, a more complex lock, or even iron bars on ground floor windows, small acts of architectural self-defense that complemented, or perhaps began to replace, the need for a personal weapon. A quirky tidbit that reflects this slow shift: some ladies' companion books from the 18th century, while still advising prudence in travel, began to focus more on evasion and calling for help than on direct physical confrontation, suggesting a gradual change in how self-defense was perceived for women. Historians still argue whether the perceived increase in public safety was a result of actual reductions in crime, or if it was simply due to more effective communication and reporting mechanisms. Whatever the precise dynamic, the rise of personal security, however imperfect, slowly began to loosen the grip of absolute individual responsibility for self-defense, subtly altering the role of that hidden dagger in a woman's life from an absolute necessity to perhaps a prudent precaution. As society gingerly stepped towards more organized personal security, the legal frameworks around carrying weapons also began a slow, often contentious evolution. Let's explore changing legal landscapes and how they impacted a woman's right, or perceived right, to carry a concealed dagger, reflecting broader societal debates about who could and should be armed. Imagine a world where laws were often local, varied, and inconsistently enforced. In many medieval and early modern contexts, there were few explicit prohibitions against individuals carrying knives or daggers, as they were common tools and personal defense was often a necessity. For men, swords and larger knives were openly carried and generally accepted. For women, the lack of overt prohibition meant that a concealed dagger, while perhaps against social decorum, was rarely illegal in itself. No law against it. Dear, but do try not to cause a scandal, your pragmatic lawyer might have advised, with a wink. Mainstream historical fact confirms that early laws regarding weapons often focused on their misuse, e.g., in brawls or for criminal acts rather than on the mere act of carrying a personal sidearm for self-defense, especially in an era without effective police forces. The right to self-defense was widely accepted, if sometimes ill-defined. However, as centralized authorities grew stronger and the concept of state-provided security began to emerge, there were increasing attempts to regulate private weapon ownership. This often targeted specific types of weapons or sought to restrict their carrying in certain public places, like within city walls or near royal courts. While these laws were primarily aimed at men and preventing public disturbances, they could, by extension, affect women. A woman might still carry her small dagger in her apron in her home village, but think twice about taking it into a heavily policed urban center. A quirky tidbit that reveals the shifting attitudes some jurisdictions, particularly in the later centuries, began to introduce specific concealed carry laws, often in response to rising urban crime or political unrest. These laws were initially quite broad, but eventually became more restrictive, aiming to disarm the populace and centralize control of force with the state. Historians still argue whether the tightening of concealed weapon laws genuinely made society safer by reducing private violence, or if it disarmed vulnerable populations, making them more susceptible to crime by those who would disregard the law. For women, these changing legal landscapes presented a subtle challenge. While the necessity of self-defense might remain, the legal implications of carrying a weapon could become more complex. What was once an unquestioned, if discreet, practice might now fall into a gray area, or even become explicitly forbidden. You would have to weigh the very real threat against the potential legal repercussions if your hidden blade were discovered, or worse, if you were forced to use it. It was a constant negotiation between personal safety and evolving societal control, making your small, silent defender a more complicated companion than ever before. As legal landscapes around weaponry began to subtly shift, a more profound, philosophical question often arose in the minds of those who chose to carry a hidden blade: the moral ambiguity of force. You see, while self-preservation was a primal instinct, the act of wielding a weapon, especially to injure or kill another human, carried immense weight, forcing a confrontation with deeply held beliefs about violence and justice. Imagine that terrifying moment: a hand lunges, a threat materializes, and your own hand instinctively reaches for the familiar hilt hidden beneath your apron. In that split second, you're not just a woman, you're a defender, a protector. But the decision to draw and use that blade, to inflict harm, is fraught with moral complexity. Was this person truly a threat? Could you have escaped without resorting to violence? What are the consequences of taking a life? Even in self-defense, these are questions that would haunt you. Even if your actions were justified, one may survive the attacker. Dear, but can one survive the deed? A priest might gently inquire, understanding the soul's burden. Mainstream historical fact confirms that religious and ethical doctrines across various periods often condemn violence, even in self-defense, though they typically allowed for it as a last resort to preserve life. The concept of justifiable homicide existed, but it was a heavy legal and moral burden for the individual involved. Consider the societal narrative. While men engaged in warfare and duels, and violence was an accepted, if often deplored, part of their world, a woman resorting to physical force, especially with a weapon, often clashed with ideals of female gentleness and piety. If you were forced to use your dagger, you might face not only legal scrutiny, but also social judgment. Regardless of the provocation, you risk being seen as unwomanly, aggressive, or even dangerous yourself. This added another layer of trepidation to the decision to carry and potentially use your concealed weapon. A quirky tidbit that illustrates this moral dilemma: some historical ballads or folk tales about women who successfully defended themselves would sometimes end not with triumphal celebration, but with a quiet sense of tragedy or a retreat from society, hinting at the lasting psychological impact of resorting to violence. Historians still argue whether the moral weight placed on using force disproportionately affected women, making them less likely to defend themselves even when justified, or if it simply reflected a universal human aversion to violence, regardless of gender. Whatever the deeper implications, for you, the hidden blade was a stark reminder that while it offered the means to survive, it also carried the profound, often solitary burden of a moral choice, a silent compact with the very act of force. While the moral weight of using a hidden blade was a profound internal struggle, for many women, the starkest reality necessitating that dagger was the pervasive shadow of worse domestic violence's dark corner. You see, beyond external threats, for countless women throughout history, the home, ostensibly a haven, often became a cage where abuse, particularly spousal abuse, was a tragically common and deeply private terror. Imagine a scene, not of outright assault, but of simmering tension: a drunken husband's raised voice, a sudden, unexpected shove, or a fist striking a wall just inches from your face. These were not isolated incidents, but often a horrifying pattern, a constant undercurrent of fear within the very walls that were supposed to protect you. In an era without social services, women's shelters, or accessible legal aid for marital disputes, escaping such a situation was often impossible. You were bound by law, custom, and often economic necessity to your abuser. A woman's lot is a hard one, sometimes dear, and some men, well, they simply don't know their own strength. A sympathetic neighbor might sigh, helpless. Mainstream historical fact confirms that domestic abuse was a widespread and largely unpunished societal problem in pre-modern periods. Legal systems, where they existed, often granted husbands broad rights over their wives, and physical chastisement was sometimes legally permissible or simply ignored by authorities. This created an environment where an abusive spouse could act with near impunity. In this horrifying context, a hidden dagger was not a weapon for a grand confrontation. It was often a last, desperate line of defense against an immediate, overwhelming threat from someone you lived with, someone who shared your bed. It was a tool to deter, to create distance, to inflict enough pain to break free and escape, even if only momentarily. The presence of the blade under your apron was a silent, terrifying secret, a desperate measure of self-preservation against the one person who, by societal decree, held power over your very existence. Consider the psychological toll: living with constant fear, the uncertainty of when the next outburst might occur, the desperate need for a way out. The hidden dagger was a physical embodiment of that desperate hope, a small but potent symbol of resistance in an otherwise powerless situation. It was a stark reminder that even within the confines of marriage, a woman might need to be prepared to fight for her life. A quirky tidbit that reveals the hidden desperation, while rarely recorded explicitly: some historical legal petitions from women seeking separation or annulment would subtly allude to cruelty or danger to life, hinting at severe physical abuse that would necessitate such desperate measures as self-arming. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of domestic violence directly contributed to the normalization of women carrying concealed weapons, or if it was simply one facet of a generally more violent society where all individuals needed personal defense. Whatever the specific causality for you, the woman facing this unseen domestic threat, your hidden blade was a grim testament to the fact that even love, or what passed for it, could become a profound danger, requiring a silent, steel-edged answer. You've now faced the chilling reality of domestic violence, a threat that made a hidden blade tragically necessary. This prompts a reevaluation of traditional narratives, leading us to beyond the sword-wielding man. You see, historical accounts in popular culture often depict armed individuals as exclusively male knights with broadswords, soldiers with spears, gentlemen with rapiers. But the reality for women, as we're uncovering, painted a far more nuanced and quietly dangerous picture of who carried a weapon and why. Imagine challenging that ingrained image. You're not a knight in shining armor, nor are you preparing for a grand battle. Your armor is your practicality. Your battlefield is your home, or the perilous road to market. Yet, you are armed. Your weapon isn't a flamboyant display of martial prowess. It's a small, unassuming knife, tucked out of sight, a silent testament to a world where defense was a universal, not gender-specific, imperative. One needs not a great sword to ward off a great evil, my dear, a wise old crone might observe, her eyes twinkling with knowing experience. Mainstream historical fact indicates that while the types of weapons carried and the social context differed significantly, personal weapon ownership was not exclusively male in pre-modern societies. Women, too, possessed and sometimes used tools and implements that could serve as effective defensive arms. The focus on large, overtly military weapons in historical records often overshadows the more common, discrete forms of self-defense. This challenges the neat categorization of historical roles. Women were not merely passive recipients of protection. They were active participants in their own survival and the safety of their households. Their methods of defense were simply different, adapted to their circumstances and societal expectations. The hidden dagger embodies this quiet agency, a silent refutation of the idea that only men were capable of, or responsible for, physical defense. It highlights a form of resilience that was often overlooked in the grander narratives of battles and political intrigue. A quirky tidbit that emphasizes this point: some archaeological finds in burial sites, particularly from earlier periods, have occasionally revealed small knives or daggers buried with women, suggesting their significance as personal possessions, perhaps even for defense, within their daily lives. Historians still argue whether the historical downplaying of women's armed self-defense was a deliberate patriarchal erasure, or if it simply reflects a focus on more visible, formalized forms of combat. Whatever the interpretation, the image of the sword-wielding man now feels incomplete. You understand that the true history of armed individuals includes countless women, their weapons hidden, their courage unspoken, quietly navigating a dangerous world, ready to protect themselves and their loved ones with a subtle flash of steel. With the recognition that women, too, were quietly armed, let's trace a fascinating trajectory. The evolution of concealment. You see, the art of hiding a weapon wasn't static. It adapted and changed through the centuries, influenced by shifts in fashion, technology, and social attitudes, making the hidden blade a constantly evolving secret. Imagine the rough-spun tunics and flowing gowns of the early medieval period. Here, concealment might be relatively simple: a knife tucked into a wide sleeve or a deep fold of fabric, secured by a belt or girdle. The bulky, often layered nature of the clothing lent itself naturally to discreet carrying. The weapon itself might be a sturdy, utilitarian knife, easily mistaken for a general-purpose tool. One wears layer, dear, for warmth against the chill, and for other purposes, your grandmother might have hinted cryptically. Mainstream historical fact confirms that earlier, looser clothing styles in medieval Europe offered more natural pockets and folds for concealment compared to the more tailored garments that became popular in later centuries. This made early forms of concealed carry less reliant on specialized garment modifications. As you move into the Renaissance and early modern period, fashion became more structured. Corsets and stiffened bodices emphasized a slender silhouette. Here, the challenge of concealment became more acute, leading to more ingenious solutions. This is where the slender poignard truly came into its own. Its narrow profile ideal for slipping down a bodice or into a specially sewn stay pocket within the undergarments. Sleeves, when still voluminous, could be modified with hidden sheaths sewn into their lining, allowing for a quick, almost magical draw. The very rigidity of the fashionable form could be manipulated to hide a deadly secret. Consider the increasing detail in clothing. Embroidery, lace, and elaborate fastenings could provide visual distractions, drawing the eye away from any subtle bulge. The art of concealed carry became a delicate dance between practicality and aesthetic. A weapon might be designed with a hilt that resembled a decorative pin, or a sheath that blended seamlessly with the fabric's pattern. A quirky tidbit is the anecdotal mention of dagger garters from later periods, often for men, but sometimes, by extension, imagined for women. These were straps with small sheaths that would hold a miniature dagger to the calf, hidden beneath long skirts. While less common for everyday female wear, it speaks to the persistent ingenuity of concealment. Historians still argue whether the increased sophistication of clothing concealment techniques in later centuries reflects a greater societal need for covert self-defense, or merely the natural progression of fashion meeting persistent individual security concerns. Whatever the interplay, you understood that the hidden blade was a living secret, constantly adapting its form to blend into the changing canvases of historical attire, always ready to emerge when necessity called. As the hidden blade itself evolved, so too did its meaning beyond mere practicality. Let's delve into how this concealed weapon, particularly in a woman's possession, transformed into a powerful wanshani symbol of female agency. Wetari, it was a quiet, yet potent, statement of defiance, independence, and a refusal to be a passive victim in a world that often sought to define women by their vulnerability. Imagine the societal expectations: women were to be demure, protected, reliant on male authority. Yet, a hidden dagger directly contradicted this narrative. It represented a deliberate choice to take personal responsibility for one's safety, an act of self-empowerment in a world where overt power was denied to most women. When you placed that small blade beneath your apron, you were not just preparing for danger. You were asserting your right to defend your own life, your body, and your children. They may preach that a woman is weak, dear, but a sharp blade in a strong hand tells a different tale. An independent-minded widow might have mused. Mainstream historical fact confirms that despite societal restrictions, women throughout history found various ways to exercise agency, whether through economic activity, social influence, or, in this case, personal defense. The act of carrying a weapon, even discreetly, was a tangible manifestation of this often unacknowledged power. Consider the psychological impact. Knowing you possessed a means of defense, however small, could instill a quiet confidence. It transformed you from a potential victim into a potential survivor. This internal shift in mindset, the knowledge that you had a choice beyond mere submission, was a powerful form of agency in itself. It allowed you to navigate dangerous situations with a greater sense of self-possession. Even if the weapon never left its sheath, the very potential for resistance was a form of strength. A quirky tidbit that showcases this symbolism in some cultures: small, ornamental knives or pins resembling daggers were worn by women as symbolic charms for protection or as representations of their household authority. While not always functional weapons, their very form echoed the pragmatic reality of armed defense. Historians still argue whether the increased historical visibility of women with concealed weapons through archaeological finds or rare historical accounts directly contributed to broader changes in female social status, or if it was merely a symptom of a pre-existing, though unacknowledged, female resilience. Whatever the exact relationship, you understood that your hidden dagger was more than just steel and leather. It was a tangible expression of your will, a defiant whisper of self-determination in a world that often tried to silence women. It was your agency, sharp and unyielding, tucked safely out of sight. You've now appreciated the hidden blade as a symbol of defiance, but let's return to the stark reality that underpinned its necessity when home was not safe. This is perhaps the most unsettling truth behind women carrying daggers, a grim counterpoint to the idealized image of the domestic haven. You see, for countless women throughout history, the very place they were expected to be most secure was often the site of their greatest vulnerability. Imagine the pervasive sense of unease, a constant, low-level hum of anxiety that never quite leaves you. You've locked the door, drawn the curtains, and the fire crackles cheerfully in the hearth. But the threat isn't from without, it's from within. It could be an abusive spouse, as we've discussed, whose unpredictable moods turn a loving home into a terrifying prison. Or perhaps it's a disgruntled servant, a desperate relative, or an unexpected visitor who, once inside, reveals hostile intentions. There were no quick exits, no panic buttons, and in the confines of a small house, nowhere truly to run. Home is where the heart is, they say, but sometimes, dear, it's also where the danger hides. A weary neighbor might confide, her eyes holding a deep understanding. Mainstream historical fact confirms that incidents of violence within the household, including homicide, were not uncommon in historical periods. These cases were often complex, involving family disputes, economic pressures, or issues of control, and were frequently dealt with privately or by local informal justice rather than through formal legal channels. Consider the layout of a typical historical home: small, often dark rooms, limited escape routes, and a lack of immediate communication with the outside world. If a threat emerged from within, a woman could quickly find herself cornered, isolated, and overwhelmed. Her hidden dagger was not a weapon for a prolonged fight, but a desperate tool for a fleeting opportunity, a quick jab, a defensive cut, anything to create a moment's respite, a chance to escape or call for help that might never come. It was a testament to the fact that personal safety could never truly be delegated in a world where the concept of a truly safe space was often a fragile illusion. A quirky tidbit that hints at this vulnerability: some historical architectural manuals, while primarily focused on grand designs, would occasionally include notes on securing domestic spaces against internal threats or unruly elements, subtly acknowledging the potential for danger from within the household. Historians still argue whether the lack of comprehensive legal protections for women in domestic disputes directly led to the widespread practice of self-arming, or if the prevalence of a more violent society simply meant that all individuals, regardless of gender, had to be prepared for threats from any quarter. Whatever the causality, you, the historical woman, knew that your home, for all its supposed sanctity, could become a trap. And in that chilling realization, your hidden blade was not just a tool for the road, but a grim, quiet assurance that even in your own four walls, you would not be entirely defenseless. Having peered into the unsettling truth of a home that wasn't always safe, let's now consider the broader implications of this phenomenon. Reflecting on the legacy of the hidden blade, you see, the widespread, discreet carrying of daggers by women throughout history isn't just a quirky historical tidbit. It offers profound insights into female resilience, the nature of power, and the evolution of personal safety in societies very different from our own. Imagine looking back across centuries, observing countless women from the queen in her castle to the peasant in her hut, each with a small, silent protector tucked away. This wasn't a coordinated movement, nor was it openly celebrated in most historical narratives. Instead, it was a quiet, almost instinctive response to pervasive danger, a testament to the universal human drive for self-preservation, regardless of gender or social standing. The hidden blade leaves a legacy not of aggression, but of deep-seated survival instinct. They say history is written by men, dear, but a woman's true story is often etched in steel, A wise matriarch might have observed. Mainstream historical fact confirms that while often marginalized in official records, the domestic and personal lives of women were rich with agency and adaptation. The existence of concealed weapons speaks to a practical, pragmatic approach to safety that belies their often portrayed passivity. This legacy also forces us to reconsider traditional notions of power. In a world where overt power was largely wielded by men through military might or political office, the hidden dagger represented a more subtle, personal form of empowerment. It was the power to resist, the power to deter, the power to survive. It was a private assertion of bodily autonomy and self-determination, a quiet defiance of a patriarchal system that often sought to render women vulnerable and dependent. It shows that even in highly restrictive societies, individuals found ways to carve out spaces of personal control and protection. Consider how this contrasts with modern life. Today, you rely on a complex network of law enforcement, legal systems, and social services for your safety. While imperfect, this infrastructure has largely removed the immediate, personal imperative for constant self-armament for most women in Western societies. The hidden blade is largely a relic, a fascinating echo of a bygone era, a quirky tidbit that reinforces this legacy. In some feminist historical interpretations, the hidden knife or dagger has been re-examined as a powerful symbol of female resistance against oppression and violence, giving it new meaning beyond its mere utilitarian function. Historians still argue whether the memory of women carrying weapons was deliberately suppressed in later historical narratives to reinforce more domesticated ideals of femininity, or if it simply faded as societal conditions changed and the practice became less necessary. Whatever the reason for its historical obscurity, the legacy of the hidden blade is a powerful reminder that women have always found ways to protect themselves, adapting, enduring, and quietly asserting their agency in a world that often underestimated their strength. As the last echoes of those hidden histories fade, you are left with the quiet, profound impression of the quiet defender's mark. This isn't a grand monument or a celebrated battle scar. It's the subtle, almost imperceptible legacy left by countless women who carried a blade in secret, a testament to resilience, pragmatism, and unyielding self-preservation. Imagine the glint of the knife, seen only by its owner, perhaps only for a second, before it vanishes back into the folds of an apron. This ephemeral flash, this silent readiness, speaks volumes. It leaves a mark not on history books, but on the very fabric of human endurance. It's the strength in a woman's grip on a hidden hilt, the unwavering resolve in her eyes as she faces down a threat, unseen by the wider world. This quiet mark is a testament to the unwritten stories, the countless acts of courage performed in the shadows of domestic life and dangerous journeys. The faint scent of old linen, the imagined coolness of steel against skin, the soft rustle of an apron, these sensory details linger, drawing you deeper into the quiet determination of those women. They remind you that protection wasn't always loud or public. Sometimes it was a whisper, a secret held close, ready to manifest with swift, decisive action. It's a powerful counter-narrative to the idea of helplessness, showcasing an inherent capability that was simply adapted to circumstances. The final image that settles in your mind is one of quiet strength. It's the understanding that even amidst vulnerability, a profound sense of agency can exist. The hidden dagger wasn't just a tool, it was a symbol of an inner resolve, a constant readiness to face the unforeseen. Its mark is etched not in stone, but in the enduring spirit of survival that transcends centuries and gender. A powerful reminder of how individuals adapt to the world they inhabit. As the sounds of this historical journey soften and the light around you dims, feel the quiet reassurance of that enduring mark. It's the whisper of countless women who protected themselves and their loved ones, not with fanfare, but with quiet courage and a hidden blade. Their stories, though often untold, resonate with a profound strength that echoes even now. Let that sense of quiet defense, of innate capability, settle around you as a comforting blanket. The journey is complete, and the understanding of this hidden history now rests softly within your mind. Sweet dreams.